The moment I stepped onto that stage, something cracked in the air. A single chair scraped behind me, a sharp, metallic shriek that cut through the ceremony like a blade. I froze for a fraction of a second, then kept moving, but the sound had already done its work. It wasn't just noise. It was a signal, a prelude to chaos, an omen of betrayal. And then her voice, my sister's voice, slicing through the room with a precision that left no space for denial. "You lied. You cheated." Every head turned, every smile froze midair, every hand suspended over programs and phones. Time itself seemed to hesitate, waiting for me to respond, to collapse, to beg. But I walked step by measured step, heart hammering, stomach coiled like a steel spring. Years of work, sleepless nights, sacrifices, everything condensed into a single aisle, every eye burning into me, questioning, judging. I saw my parents first, faces locked in a frozen tableau of disbelief, fear, and helplessness. Then I saw the audience, a living organism, pulsating with shock and curiosity, craving chaos, hungry for a story. And there she was, Ariana, standing taller than life, eyes blazing, pointing, accusing, performing with meticulous cruelty. The girl I had once idolized, the one who braided my hair and whispered encouragement, had become the architect of my public unraveling. And in that moment, I realized something deeper than humiliation. This wasn't just a sister's betrayal. This was the culmination of months, maybe years, of deliberate sabotage, quiet manipulations that had threaded through my life unnoticed. And now it was all exposed in front of everyone. The auditorium held its collective breath, waiting for the collapse. But collapse wasn't in my nature. Not anymore. The first step of my reckoning had begun. You need to understand, this wasn't spontaneous. The betrayal had been assembling in shadows, in whispered emails, in subtle adjustments that only someone with intimate knowledge of my life could orchestrate. Scholarship payments mysteriously missing, tutoring accusations I hadn't written, a plagiarism complaint that arrived in my inbox like a dagger with my name carved into the handle. At first, I doubted myself. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I had overlooked some tiny mistake. But patterns don't lie. Someone was meticulously rewriting the narrative of my life, painting me as deceitful, incompetent, undeserving, and the most painful part, that someone knew me better than anyone else. My habits, my passwords, my weaknesses, the rhythm of my days. It was intimate, surgical, personal. Every time I thought I had a grip on reality, another crack appeared, another subtle fracture in the foundation I'd built with sweat and discipline. And always it traced back to her, Ariana, the golden sister, the one I had followed in childhood like a moth to impossible light. Her brilliance had always cast me in shadow, but I tolerated it, I revered it, I worshipped it, until the admiration became envy, and the envy became a weapon. Each small sabotage, each calculated misdirection, each fabricated cancellation. These were her marks, her fingerprints, invisible to the world, but unmistakable once you knew where to look. I spent nights staring at screens, tracing emails, reconstructing timelines, feeling the cold pulse of fear turn into sharp clarity. Someone had been choreographing my downfall piece by piece for months, maybe years. And when I walked onto that stage, it wasn't just a ceremony, it was the apex of her plan, her final performance. But here's the thing, the deeper you descend into the truth, the more you realize that fear is only the surface. Underneath is control, a system designed to bend perception, to twist reality, to make you question yourself while the real manipulator sits unseen, smiling. And now, standing there, the world watching, I understood I had to reclaim the narrative or it would consume me entirely. Nothing about what happened that year was an accident. Manipulation rarely works in grand gestures. It works in micro-hets, tiny wounds that don't bleed enough to alarm you, but just enough to weaken you. That's how Ariana operated. Quiet sabotage disguised as coincidence. A missing scholarship adjustment here. A canceled appointment there, a question raised in hushed tones, a whisper traveling through halls like a virus, and all the while she kept smiling, kept playing the brilliant, broken daughter who just needed time to figure things out. But behind that carefully curated fragility was calculation, precision, hunger, a hunger for validation she believed the world had stolen from her and handed to me. And when you take something from someone who feels entitled to everything, they don't get angry. They get strategic. That's when I reached out to the one person who saw patterns where others saw noise. Noah Vance. Quiet, analytical, unsettlingly perceptive. He didn't react with sympathy. He reacted with focus. If someone's rewriting your life, he said, they left footprints, and he found them. Access logs from a Portland home network mirrored email, addresses crafted to mimic mine. Time-stamped intrusions. Financial inconsistencies aligned with Ariana's patterns. Evidence that didn't just suggest sabotage, it documented it. Line by line, proof sharper than any accusation she could scream in a crowded auditorium. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. I stopped hoping Ariana was innocent. I stopped praying for reconciliation. I stopped pretending that blood was an excuse for betrayal. And I began preparing, not to survive, but to confront, to take back control of the narrative she'd been twisting around my throat. I met with an attorney, organized files, printed logs, tracked timelines. Every piece of evidence became a weapon forged out of the very lies she used to destroy me. And with each step, I felt the fear dissolve into something quieter, colder, stronger, purpose. But before we go deeper, if you're still here, if you're feeling this descent, comment, I do not break twice, not once. Twice, because after this point, you're no longer just watching a story, you're stepping into it. Graduation week didn't feel like an ending, it felt like a countdown. A quiet ticking under my ribs, each second tightening the air around me. Everyone else on campus was celebrating, taking selfies in their caps, laughing in clusters outside the library. But I moved through those days like I was walking inside a glass maze, aware of every reflection, every angle where something could strike, and she knew it. Ariana sensed the shift in me, not because she saw proof, but because manipulators always feel when their grip begins to loosen. Her texts increased, short, cutting. Fake concern dipped in venom. Hope you're ready for the big day. Don't choke. Make sure you thank the people who really got you there. She wanted me rattled. She wanted me cracked open by fear. But fear is only powerful when you run from it. When you walk toward it, when you stare into its center, it becomes something else entirely, fuel. The night before graduation, I laid out everything. The evidence, the logs, the statements, the sealed envelope labeled with the exact coordinates my dean needed. My hands moved with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. This wasn't the anxiety of a cornered victim. It was the composure of someone who had studied their enemy long enough to predict their next breath. When I slipped the envelope inside my gown, it felt like armor, not visible, not loud, but unbreakable. At sunrise, I walked onto campus knowing two things with absolute certainty. Ariana would attack, and this time, I was ready. The auditorium was buzzing, warm, bright, celebratory. The perfect stage for someone starving for attention. And there she was, wearing white like she wanted to be the main character. Chin high, eyes scanning for an audience to devour. She wasn't a sister that morning. She was a storm wearing a smile. My parents hovered close, uneasy, sensing thunder they couldn't see. My father squeezed my shoulder, unaware that the truth inside my gown would shatter the illusion he'd protected for years. And as I took my seat on stage, looking down at hundreds of waiting faces, one truth settled over me with chilling clarity. Ariana didn't come to watch me graduate. She came to finish what she started. The question was no longer whether she would strike. It was how far she would go and how far I was willing to go to stop her. When the ceremony began, the room felt alive, a single massive organism breathing in waves of applause and small talk. But beneath that warmth was a current, a quiet electricity I could feel crawling over my skin. Ariana sat in the audience like a match waiting to be struck, spine rigid, eyes locked on me with a hunger that didn't belong in a family event. She wasn't listening to the speeches. She wasn't watching the stage. She was waiting for the exact second the world would look her way. Manipulators don't crave justice. They crave attention, and she wanted all of it. My name wasn't even close to being called yet when I felt it, a shift in the air, the tightening before a predator leaps. Then it happened, a violent scrape. Her chair shooting back, a sound sharp enough to slice the ceremony clean in half. She cheated her way through college. Her voice wasn't a shout. It was an explosion, a detonation of 4 years' worth of her resentment compressed into one perfect moment. The audience froze, heads snapped toward her, 100 phones lifted instantly. Even the faculty stilled, as if a spell had been cast over the auditorium. She lied. She manipulated the system. Ask anyone. Her finger shot toward me, trembling with adrenaline and triumph. She had rehearsed this, she had fantasized about this. This was her grand finale. For a heartbeat, the world went silent, not empty. Charged, the kind of silence that could either swallow you or set you free. I stood slowly, every movement deliberate, every breath anchored in the truth she didn't know I had prepared. As I walked down the aisle, the whispers didn't hit me like knives. They parted around me like a curtain because fear was no longer steering me. I wasn't walking toward a stage, I was walking toward the end of her illusion. And somewhere in that tense, electric silence, I realized something powerful. Ariana thought she had destroyed me. She had no idea she had just walked into her own unveiling. By the time I reached the podium, everything had already shifted. The auditorium still buzzed with disbelief, but it was no longer Ariana controlling the narrative. Her accusations meant to fracture me had become her own undoing. I leaned just slightly toward the dean and whispered the code we had arranged. The envelope, invisible beneath my gown, held the proof of her manipulation, logs, mirrored emails, financial tampering, the quiet choreography of sabotage she had executed for months. And in that moment, I understood a brutal truth about power. It's not about who shouts the loudest. It's about who holds the unseen leverage. The dean nodded imperceptibly, a signal only I could read, and the room began to tilt without anyone noticing. Security moved subtly, a silent current redirecting the flow of attention. Faces that had gaped at her spectacle now flicked toward her with confusion, concern, a dawning awareness that the story wasn't what it seemed. She screamed, waved, tried to reclaim the moment, but the energy had shifted. The truth didn't have to yell. It radiated quietly, inexorably, like gravity itself. And that's when the most dangerous lesson sank in. Exposure doesn't just reveal wrongdoing, it exposes intent, desire, character. All the careful lies, all the quiet manipulation, all the rehearsed attacks suddenly became visible in the way people looked at her. Their judgment, subtle but absolute, began forming without a word from me. She realized too late that silence could be more powerful than accusation. And as I stepped down from the stage, diploma in hand, it wasn't just a victory for me. It was the awakening of everyone who had witnessed her performance. They weren't just spectators. They were participants in the reckoning. Ariana's control was gone. My fear had been replaced with strategy, my doubt replaced with evidence. The stage had become a proving ground, not of grades or applause, but of truth. And sometimes, the world has a way of bending toward justice quietly, without anyone realizing it until the moment it's already happened. By the time the last name was called, the auditorium had shifted. The air no longer trembled with accusation. It pulsed with realization. Faces that had once expected my collapse now registered the subtle power of someone who had mastered the chaos around them. Ariana's fury, once a roaring tide, had been redirected into stillness, frustration, and a faint panic. The performance she had designed for attention had collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth, and in that collapse I understood something few ever do. The most dangerous knowledge isn't the one you find in books or whispered in conspiracies. It's the knowledge that you can survive, maneuver, and reclaim control in a world designed to undermine you. Walking off the stage, the diploma in my hand, I felt the quiet hum of strategy complete. I had not only protected my reputation, but I had revealed the hidden choreography, the patterns of envy and calculation that had haunted me for years. The room, previously captivated by spectacle, now held an unspoken lesson. Power is invisible until it's demonstrated. Authority isn't what people claim in loud declarations. It's what they enforce in the shadows through preparation, patience, and precision. Every step, every choice, every calculated movement had shifted the balance, not with rage, but with the lethal subtlety of truth. And this is the real danger in the story, the part that will linger long after the applause fades, the knowledge of unseen systems, of quiet sabotage, of people who manipulate from within your own circle, changes how a man sees the world. Once you know it, you cannot unknow it. Once you recognize the signs, you cannot pretend the world is innocent. You walk differently, you trust differently, you prepare differently, and maybe, just maybe, you become something stronger, sharper, unbreakable, because the truth isn't a story. It's a weapon. The question now is this: will you let it awaken you, or will you let it pass unnoticed? As the final echoes of the ceremony faded, one truth remained clear. Control isn't about the loudest voice, the biggest performance, or the most attention. Real power is hidden. It's the quiet preparation, the evidence carefully gathered, the patience to wait for the perfect moment, and the courage to step into your own strength when everyone expects you to falter. What happened on that stage wasn't just a graduation, it was a reckoning, a revelation of patterns most never notice, of envy and manipulation hidden behind familiar faces, and of the invisible battles fought in silence. The world is full of forces that try to rewrite your story, to plant doubt, to manipulate outcomes without your notice. But once you see the threads, once you trace the patterns, once you understand that fear can be transformed into strategy, you gain a power few ever realize exists. You no longer stumble through life reacting to chaos. You step into it, anticipate it, and reshape it in your favor. The story doesn't end when the stage clears. It ends when you decide to act to protect your truth and to recognize the subtle currents of influence around you. Every whispered lie, every fabricated claim, every moment someone tried to undermine you becomes fuel if you choose to harness it. And that perhaps is the most dangerous knowledge of all, the ability to transform betrayal, manipulation, and fear into a weapon of clarity and unshakable purpose. So, as you walk away from this story, ask yourself, are you prepared to recognize the invisible forces shaping your life? Are you ready to reclaim control before the world decides it for you? Because once you see the truth, there is no going back. And that is when you truly become unstoppable.